Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. This is the Revenue Cycle Decoded channel, and I'm your host, Gina Cornett, and we are breaking down all things revenue cycle. So today, we are going to break down myths about revenue cycle. It is a very complex and sometimes misunderstood process, and a lot of people don't really know a lot about revenue cycle. And even if they do know something about it, sometimes what they think they know may not be what it really is. So over the years, I've heard some myths about how it works, and some of them are harmless, but some can lead to some costly mistakes if they are believed. So, in today's episode, we are going to talk about the top 10 revenue cycle myths. And not only am I going to bust these myths, but I'm also going to show you some real world examples so you can understand how the truth can help you avoid pitfalls and improve your processes. Let's get started. So, the first myth, and I've talked about this in another video, is that revenue cycle is just billing. And this is probably one of the most common misconceptions that I hear. Many people think that revenue cycle is just about sending out the bills and collecting the payments, but it is really just so much more because it covers everything from the time that you first receive a referral to see a patient and you get them scheduled and you get them registered all the way through insurance verification to coding the claim and actually documenting the claim. That's another important piece of revenue cycle. Claim submission, denials management, and collections. It all comes in to all of those processes that have to work together to make sure that a claim gets paid appropriately. So imagine that a patient is registered with incorrect insurance information. Even if the billing department does everything right, the claim will likely be denied, causing delays and frustration. And so understanding the full scope of revenue cycle is critical for identifying and fixing issues early in the process. And this is where each member that is involved in revenue cycle, whether it's patient access, clinicians and providers, coders and billers, all have to understand their role in the revenue cycle, but they also need to understand the overall process so that they will really get a handle on how what they do impacts the whole process from the beginning of that patient's first visit all the way through collecting on the claim. So, the next myth that I'm going to bust is that denials are inevitable. Okay, we hear a lot in the industry about payers just want to deny claims, payers don't want to pay claims, and there's a lot of blame placed on payers. But guys, we have to own some of the blame for denials ourselves. When we take accountability for that, we will realize that no, denials aren't inevitable. We do have a part to play in preventing denials. And so, while some teams believe that denials are just a fact of life, the truth is most denials are preventable if you have the right processes in place. So denials often happen because of missing prior authorizations or incomplete documentation or incorrect coding. But a lot of denials happen because the front office processes are not being performed correctly. So we're not doing eligibility and benefits verification. We're not getting those prior authorizations. We're not getting our demographic and insurance information correct. It's not entered correct in our system. And that's where a good number, almost 50% of denials happen. You can potentially see, very high denial rates for one of these things, but by implementing real-time eligibility tools or pre-authorization workflows, you can really decrease or even eliminate some of those denials. So, with that proactive approach, you can significantly reduce denials and recover more revenue for your organization or your practice. Now, myth number 3, patients understand their financial responsibilities. Or I've heard it put another way, it's not my responsibility to educate patients. That's a big myth. Many providers just assume that patients know how their insurance works and what they'll owe, but that's very rarely the case. If you think about it, how well do you understand your own insurance plan? Maybe because we're in the industry, we look at it a little more closely and pay more attention to it, but sometimes it's challenging even for us to understand what will be covered and what won't, and what our financial responsibility is going to be. So we really do have to be educators. Patients often don't understand things like copays, deductibles, or coinsurance. They don't understand what that means. And we have to be really careful with the language that we use with them. If we tell a patient that their service, their procedure is covered, but they have a huge deductible they haven't met yet, yeah, it's covered under their plan, but that doesn't mean the plan's going to pay for it. But that's what patients hear. They hear my plan is going to pay for this, when really they have a deductible that they have to meet before their plan would pay. And so maybe they're going to get the advantage of the contracted rate that the plan is negotiated that's going to reduce the charge, but they're still going to have to meet that deductible or pay that coinsurance or copay out of pocket. So this confusion can lead to patients receiving bills that are a surprise to them, or delayed payments, or even patients not paying at all because they don't understand their bill. And it can certainly lead to patient dissatisfaction. So a patient might receive a bill for $1,000 and they think it's an error because they didn't realize their deductible hadn't been met. So taking the time to educate patients to the best of our ability on their financial responsibilities up front can improve their satisfaction and more than likely increase their propensity to pay. Now, it also gives us an opportunity when we're having these discussions to identify those patients who may have difficulty paying for those large deductibles or out-of-pocket expenses, and it helps us to help them to find a solution. Okay, myth number 4 is automation fixes everything. Well, automation is a powerful tool, but it's not the magic solution. It has to be implemented and monitored carefully to deliver results. And I would say the same thing about AI. We get all excited about artificial intelligence, and there truly is tremendous excitement in the industry about AI and the potential solutions that it could offer. But that the same time, there's some hesitation as people realize that it's not going to happen tomorrow and we're going to have to implement carefully. So, if we set up our AI tools or our automation tools incorrectly, or they're used without oversight, they really could create potentially more problems than they solve. An example would be a claim scrubbing tool that's flagging incorrect codes, but it's not fixing errors in patient demographics, which still lead to denials. Or it could be relying completely on automation to code and then subsequently bill our claims without actually having a human coder reviewing the documentation to make sure that it supports the codes that we're billing. So automation works best when we combine it with skilled staff who can oversee and then optimize the process. Now, next myth is that all payers follow the same rules. And if only this were true, it would make our lives so much easier. But in reality, every payer has its own set of rules and quirks, and keeping up with them, for those of us in revenue cycle, it is a constant challenge, but it's also job security because when we're the ones having to go out and find these rules, that's what they pay us for. So, I've heard many times people say, well, Medicaid has the same rules as Medicare, right? No, not necessarily. Or Medicare Advantage is going to have exactly the same rules as Medicare. Well, there might be some hoops to jump through for Medicare Advantage. So we have to pay attention to those payer specific requirements. For example, Medicare has very strict timelines for claim submission, but there are some payers that have even more strict guidelines. In some cases, Medicare might require one set of codes to process a claim for a specific procedure or service, whereas a commercial payer may require completely different codes or different modifiers. One payer might require an authorization for a CT scan and another doesn't. And each of them requires different documentation. So you have to look at their medical policies to see what they consider meets medical necessity. So it's very, very important to understand each payer's unique requirements so that we can avoid delays and denials. Now, the next myth is that small errors don't matter. It's easy to overlook small mistakes, but in revenue cycle, even tiny errors can have big consequences. A single typo in a patient's insurance ID could lead to a rejected claim, delaying payment by weeks. Or the same thing could happen with a patient's insurance number. Now we've got to figure out what is the correct insurance number. So, all because somebody transposed a couple of numbers because we're all human, right? So, it's really important to pay attention to those small details. Another example would be if a physician leaves out a very important element that supports medical necessity for a specific procedure. In that case, that claim could be recouped eventually when the payer comes and audits claims. Another example would be a provider that doesn't document laterality when it's required. And so we don't get the specific ICD-10 code on the claim. And then, of course, again, it doesn't meet medical necessity and the payer denies the claim. So, in every step of the revenue cycle, attention to detail is critically important. Myth number 7, denied claims aren't worth the effort. And you would be surprised at how many denied claims never get worked. So some people think that they just take up too much time. They're not going to get the bang for the buck. Okay. But they do represent lost revenue and it can be recovered using the right approach. So, effective denial management includes reviewing the denial reasons carefully and correcting errors when appropriate so that you can rebuild the claims or submitting appeals when necessary. Now, you may have to apply a process to determine which claims are going to be worth your effort. Obviously, if it's going to cost you $50 to rework and rebuild a claim and you're going to collect 25, that's a waste of time and a waste of money. But if it's going to cost you $50 to check into a denied claim and you're going to recover a couple of $1,000s, darn right, we're going to go work that claim. So figure out which of those claims are going to be important for you to work and then track and trend your denials. That way you'll know where you're seeing the denials for the highest charges or the denials that you're getting consistently from, say, a single payer. And you really want to hone in on those so you can solve those problems and get the greatest return for your effort. Don't leave that money sitting on the table. Those denied claims are often worth the effort to work them. Now, myth number 8, revenue cycle success is all about technology. Well, technology is a great tool, but just as we discussed with automation and AI, it's not a replacement for skilled people and effective processes. A strong revenue cycle combines trained staff who understand the processes with efficient workflows that reduce bottlenecks and technology that supports but doesn't replace your team. Success comes from balancing all of 3 elements and not relying on technology alone. Now, the next myth is that prior authorizations are just a formality. And a corollary to that myth would be that prior authorizations mean the payer's going to pay. Well, guess what? A prior authorization is never a guarantee of payment. Why? Because you could end up submitting a claim with ICD-10 codes that don't match the service or procedure or the ICD-10 codes that you requested in the initial authorization. Or you could submit a claim for services provided outside of the dates of authorization, or your patient's insurance could have terminated by the time you provide the service. In each of those cases, a prior authorization is not going to help you because the payer's not going to pay. So it's tempting that we think of prior authorization as just another box to check. And sometimes we'll say, I'm just going to do it and I'll ask for a retroactive authorization after, kind of like asking for forgiveness after the fact. But in that case, the chances are pretty high that the payer's not going to approve that retroactive authorization unless the services or procedures were provided on an emergency basis. So those prior authorizations are critical to ensuring that claims are paid. And I know they're onerous, they're burdensome, they add to that administrative burden. Our providers hate them, but they are a hoop that we have to jump through. And so we need to learn to do it well, because if we fail to obtain that proper authorization, we're going to get denied claims, even if the service is medically necessary. A hospital, could perform an MRI without an authorization, and now it's a $2,000 denial, and that's not going to get paid. So treat those prior authorizations as a key part of the revenue cycle and not as an afterthought. And as part of that, when you are submitting the claim, make sure that the codes match what was pre-authorized. Make sure that the dates match what was pre-authorized. The rendering provider, all of those things have to line up with what the payer authorized, or you're going to take a chance that that service or procedure would not be paid. And then the final myth, that revenue cycle management ends with billing. Well, it doesn't end when the bill goes out, because then we have follow-up. So follow-up is just as important for ensuring timely and complete payment. And that includes following up on any unpaid claims, resolving patient billing questions, and they're going to come, and monitoring accounts receivable metrics. A claim that isn't followed up could slip past the payer's timely filing guidelines, resulting in a total loss. And if we don't follow up on patient responsibility that is owed, we could end up sending our patients to collections. So ongoing follow-up is essential for maintaining that healthy revenue cycle. So if you're ready to bust more myths and master the revenue cycle, I would like to invite you to join the Revenue Cycle Bootcamp Facebook group. And you'll find the link in the description below. This group has been created specifically to support and educate revenue cycle professionals like you, and to help those folks who are interested in revenue cycle as a career to learn more about it. So click on the link below and come on over to the group. I'd love to meet you inside. Thank you for joining me to debunk these common revenue cycle myths. And if you've heard other myths or have questions about the revenue cycle, please drop them in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your team. So until the next time, peace out.